Back in my day, there was this thing called the Rubik's Cube. It was a puzzle that you twisted and turned to get all the colors to one side and to make a beautiful pattern where all the colors aligned. And it seemed like no matter how you twisted or turned, it would just lead to utter frustration and seemed impossible to solve. It seemed like almost that you needed to be a magician and have a magic trick to do it. However, what you discovered was that there was a pattern, that there was a system into doing it. And once you learned that pattern and system, it would take you mere seconds to solve. And you would never have to use anything else to do it. It could be jumbled as much as possible, and still, if you use the system, you'll solve it. In writing, there's something similar called the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is a system that's designed to help you tell your story. Most stories, if not all, have a 3-act structure. It's the how you get to the 3-act structure that's the interesting part in writing, because not everybody does it the same. There are many methods that you can use to get to the 3-act structure, and that is what this show is about, as we take a look at how you develop your own 3-act structure that works for you.
Hey guys, I am Katie Salidas. I am the author of urban fantasy and paranormal book series. Got about 6 right now with more to come. I'm also the host and producer of the Spilling Ink Show and a publishing consultant with Rising Sign Books.
Hi, I'm J.K. Allen. I write primarily young adult urban fantasy, and I have the Angel Born series and the Half-Blood Alliance, which just came out this September. You can find me at hijinkswriter.com.
Hi, I'm Anita Stewart. I write under A.S. Stewart. I'm the author of the Camelot Immortal series and the Saga of the Outer Island series. And I write dark fiction, horror, and fantasy that people die in an awful lot.
Hi, I'm Madeleine Holly Rosing. I'm the writer-creator of the graphic novel and prose series, Boston Metaphysical Society. It's a steampunk supernatural series. I am also the author of Kickstarter for the Independent Creator.
I know that each series and each sequel and all of that is its own thing, and it's different for, if you've done multiple series, it's different every time, or maybe it's not. But I'm curious, how often do you find yourself laying it all out up front, and how often is it a feel things, or are you planning an exact amount at an exact time and all of that?
When I'm working on the graphic novels, everything is laid out ahead of time, and that has to do with page count and budget. So everything is, particularly with the first 6-issue miniseries, that was mapped out ahead of time. I then decided when that was done to do sequels, but there were standalone sequels, so I just needed to pretty much map out what that story was and leave enough open-endedness for me to go wherever I wanted to go afterwards, which is very different from when I'm doing my prose. I will map out, have an outline, but that is always subject to change as I write and learn more about the characters, and if I need to delve deeper into a part of the world I hadn't done before. But there's always an overall plan.
Yeah, I would say that I like to spend time with my characters. So I always, before I start a series, will kind of make sure I have enough ideas for a whole series rather than just one book. But I don't like when it feels like stretched thin, like you've got you're scraping jelly on toast and you're trying to make it reach the edge. I don't like that feeling with books. So I'll plot out by book, but I'll also kind of have ideas for this will happen in book 2, this will happen in book 3. And of course, I have things that I discover as I'm writing book 1 that I'm okay, now I need to follow this in book 2. So I don't extensively plan out all of the books I'm going to write before I start writing book 1, but I like to have, like I said, enough ideas to kind of spread out so I can have a nice full series.
I'm currently writing my series all at the same time because it's just one book leads into the other, and it's the only way to do it without getting confused. Because I wrote the previous series one book at a time, and it was a nightmare trying to keep everything straight. So I have found that I need to plan out the series from top to bottom and then write the whole thing together.
See, and I'm the pantser of the group, like 100% by the seat of my pants. I know generally what I want to have happen in each book, and I know that the character must grow. The main character that I'm focusing on needs to grow in each book in some way. And so that's kind of the way I approach it. And when it comes to like writing book series, I love the number 3. So I tend to go by 3s. So if I plan for a book to be a series, then it's usually planned for at least 3 books with 3 specific types of growth in each. And then if it goes beyond that, so some of my book series are like 6 book series, that second set, I approach that when I get to that point, and then plan out the growth for that character for the next 3 books. So it's really kind of, I feel it out, but I do generally have an idea of the type of character growth I'm looking at.
So when you're looking at each book, is there a different approach to that middle section of books, or the second book, as in your case when you're writing trilogies? Is there a different approach to those because you know that it's going to lead into another book, or is it the same? Do you apply the same approach you had with the first book and just keep that consistent?
Well, I always go into it with a, up the ante mentality. So whatever happened in the first book, the next book needs to have something more happen. And the character that I'm focusing on in that book series needs to have some kind of growth. So if it's like a coming of age book 1 story, now I need to have them comfortable in their own shoes, but experiencing a new type of challenge that's going to force them to grow into, their more adult self, or to grow into their powers if they've, developed powers. For my very first series, the 2 books that were the 4th or the 5th and 6th book actually started their own series. So they ended up breaking off into a different series. It's all about the focal character, what growth they've come up to at that point, and then how can I up the ante in what they're about to experience and force them to grow more.
Well, with my series, the one I'm writing now, book 2 is actually dealing with all the consequences of what happened in book 1.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then all of that ends on a cliffhanger and leads right into book 3, which ends on another cliffhanger and ends into book 4, which wraps up the first arc of the series. And then book 5 starts a new arc with a new character. So,
but you're writing. So the second book and the third book have cliffhangers. That's different than the ending of the first book, right? So
yeah, the first book more or less wraps itself up. I mean, you can read the first book as a standalone and stay there if you want. But if you read book 2, you're going to have to read book 3 and then book 4. So I'm just warning you.
Key, though, to being a series writer, even if you don't intentionally want to write a series, always leave some thread of the plot open-ended. Mm-hmm. You close out the main plot, obviously. You want to make it a satisfactory story, but you always leave little, loose strands out there that you can pick up on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The first novel I wrote, Storm of Secrets, in the Boston Metaphysical universe, was always meant to be a standalone. But, upon reflection, I look at it now, I always leave some little threads that I can go and say like, oh, well, I can continue in this direction or another direction, because I really started liking one character and want to enlarge his or her story. But to answer your original question, I approach all books in the same manner. I mean, they all have to have a beginning, middle, and an end.
For me, the second book is so hard to write. Like, that's what I'm struggling with right now, is to write the second book of my second series. So it's like when I was writing the second book of my first series, it was like pulling teeth. It was like the struggle to just pound out the words. And even though I had the whole story in my head, and I find that I'm experiencing that same kind of struggle right now with I have the plot, I have the ideas, and it's just getting the words to flow. That I don't know if it's like because I love the first book so much and I now have like extra pressure on the second book to make it just as good. But like Katie said, you have to make it bigger, you have to make it more in some way. So even if when you have a cliffhanger, or open threads to lead into the next book, you still want the reader to be like, oh, that was a good ending. So you want to make sure, not just like curse you for making me buy the next book.
Going back to Madeleine for a second, is inherently the reason why you like to do the beginning, middle, and end of everything because of your screenplay training? Because that would be how I feel like that's for me. It's been like that. You know, even though I'm writing a third book in now what is going to be a trilogy for my series, I feel like I have to wrap up the story I'm telling within that book because that's just inherently how I was trained.
I guess yes and no. I mean, it's interesting if people is struggling with like their second book in the series, and I can relate to that because I keep saying like, oh, it's because you're in the second act, and that's always a bitch to write. So yeah, I can agree with that.
You have to treat each one though like it's its own standalone, even if it's tied to the previous one and to the next one. It should be able to stand on its own. Yes, it's going to reference things that happened in the past, but it should be something that a reader could pick up if they wanted to and read it and enjoy it and go, hey, maybe I should check out book one, or, oh, there's another one after this. Great. And that's kind of the approach that I take too. I want to make sure that each book is its own solid story. If somebody happened to pick them up out of order, yeah, they're going to be a little bit out of place, but not enough so that they won't enjoy the story.
That's the worst part, though, is the recap where you're like, here's what happened previously, without being like, here's what happened previously. Like, that's the worst part, is like, how do I give what happened in book one without being like, and then she had done this, you know, and make it interesting and like naturally flow. Yeah.
I've been called out for not putting enough of that in and just expecting my readers to know, you should have already read the book. I don't want to over-explain this. We're going right into the story.
Yeah. I don't know if any of you have read, well, his real name is John Hemery, but he goes by Jack Campbell, and the Lost Fleet series, the science fiction series. He does that really well, particularly in his most recent books, because they come out, maybe, once a year. So you forget stuff.
Yeah.
And so you pick it up and you start reading, and then there's just like a line or two that like kind of wraps everything up, and then on you go. So yeah, I really admire how he does that.
With a series, the interesting things that I'm discovering in writing, multiple books and something, is when to tell somebody the repeat information that we're talking about, but moreover, like the fun things like the Easter egging and the little hints and subtleties, and then making it, and again walking that tightrope where you're making it enough for if somebody were to pick up the series within the second book that it's not so outlandish or so crazy that they wouldn't understand what's going on in that book because you're referencing something from the first book. And that's kind of where I had to walk a lot in the tightroping and figuring that out. So for what is your approach with that? Do you guys like to do the Easter egging? Do you like to throw in little subtleties? And is it a tightrope walk for you, or do you just, read the first book, damn it, and don't worry about it?
I focus on character quirks and use that as my running gags through the series.
Nice.
The Asset series that you referenced just a little bit ago, I have one character who speaks in Princess Bride quotes whenever he wants to disarm another character. And so that's something that he always goes to whenever he's trying to soften the blow, or he's trying to get this other character to actually listen to him. And that is the running gag through the entire thing. And then I have another character who his hat is his Dumbo's feather, and it's something that all of the other characters make fun of because he looks like a tool wearing this hat. And so I use these running gags and I focus on these character quirks throughout so that it does show in each and every book, and it feels kind of comfortable. It gets you settled in if you've read the previous books, but for somebody new seeing it, it's kind of that little funny quirk that they can pick up on.
I've kind of done everything backwards. When I originally started the graphic novel series, at the same time I was writing short stories and novellas that were prequels. Essentially, I was developing canon for the entire series. And then as the graphic novel continued, I made a decision that, and this is budgetary based, that everything going forward in the timeline would be in graphic novel format, and everything prior to the original 6-issue miniseries would be in prose. So everything I'm doing in prose are prequels. So what you call, Easter eggs, if you've read the graphic novels and then you start reading the prose, you're going to start seeing how some of things, how certain things happened and how certain things developed, and referencing characters that you don't get a chance to see a lot of within the graphic novel.
I have a kind of a unique situation where I can try to put Easter eggs into the series, because the series is actually, it's different characters than my first series, but it's set in the same universe. So it's all in the Angel-born world. And so, Ginny gets to make a reappearance in this book. And so I'm kind of playing around with the idea. But like I said, I'm already overthinking everything. So I'm like, do I really want to think about putting a bunch of Easter eggs in? Because I'm like, oh, geez, it's like so much to juggle already.
Yeah, well, I've got a kind of a running thing in my series where they mention this absent character, and you think, they keep dismissing him, but it pays off really big time in book 3. So, so keep an eye out for the absent character. So that runs through it. And then there's the alcohol pretty much runs through the entire series. So, because the characters drink a lot. I don't know what it is with my characters. They have somehow become alcoholics. I don't know why, but that happened in the last series too. It's like they apparently immortals drink a lot, I guess. I don't know.
Back in the day, they couldn't drink water safely, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's what they're used to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they don't have a problem with a lot of hangovers. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, must be nice.
With the mindset of that you're in a series, do you have a hard and fast rule for when you're introducing new elements, like a new world, a new gadget, a new person, even? Is there a certain point when you have to stop doing that, or do you feel like every book should have something like that?
Yeah. No, it should. But when it comes to what do you add and when do you add it, it's on an as needed basis. I don't have any like hard and fast rules of when I should introduce something new. When it comes to the asset series, I introduce new creatures every single book, and they're introduced, organically when the main character actually meets them. As far as introducing gadgets and stuff, it's definitely when she needs a gadget, it gets introduced, and I have to make sure it's something that she can use because of her limitations.
Well, let me ask you about the creatures to follow up a little bit. Is there a certain point in this book that that you have to get this creature in there, or do you feel like it can be at any point?
Depends. Book 1, it was a very slow introduction of creatures because it was as she was meeting them. In book 2, the creatures are actually part of the plot, so she's introduced to them as they would show up in the plot. When it comes to book 3 and book 4, it really was as soon as I could get them in, I did, but some of them were introduced later in the book because there was just no way for me to get them in earlier.
You want to be careful with that because you want to introduce characters like without overwhelming your reader, like Katie was saying, but you also don't want it to be convenient, like, oh, let me introduce this new weapon or this new character that they're going to need in 2 seconds, like in order to beat whoever they're fighting or, whatever happens to be going on. Like, you don't want it to feel convenient that like, hey, we just happen to meet this character who has the skill that we need to solve the riddle next.
Well, I introduced the concept even in the prequel of the series of Netherworld, so I can toss in whatever I need because they're just going to a Netherworld and suddenly they're in a whole new situation that they have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So that was easy, and I'm dealing with Arthurian legends, so I can bring in characters from Arthurian legend when I need them as well. So it was kind of a easy way to introduce new elements into the books.
Mhm. How about for Outer Islands? Did you find the same idea? Because you are referencing some known creatures and things like that too in that book.
Yeah, well, Outer Islands was kind of a lot more insular because I mean, the whole series takes place across I think it was just a few months,
Mm-hmm.
and in this small area. So it was basically just the gods and the creatures that I was dealing with there. So not a lot of new stuff got introduced. Although I did take one character mentioned from book 2 and pull it into book 3 as the villain, and I'd always planned that anyway. So because for each book in that series, there's 2 villains. There's the main villain that goes through the series, the Nightmare Crow, and then each book has its own villain.
I guess the best reference I can have is the trilogy I'm working on now, and it's such a big universe that I would only be adding anything. It'd have to be just organic because I've already introduced so many characters from this world that any more I think would kind of die under the weight of it all.
And again, with your readership and the loyalty that they have to these characters, especially the 3 main characters,
Mhm.
do you feel like you have a responsibility, or there's a certain aspect of it where you can't you can't introduce this into this point of the story, or do you feel like it can be done? It just has to be done right, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to be true to the characters, but you're right. I can't do anything crazy with them that's not appropriate for their world or for their characters, nor would I. It wouldn't even occur to me to do that. But, I've gotten such a positive reaction, particularly with Granville Woods, who was a real person. He actually existed. That I really try my best to be true to him or how I envision him.
I'm curious in developing these worlds and then getting through it, and you get to a point like the second or third book, or maybe even at the end of the first book, and people are gravitating to things that you didn't intend for them to gravitate towards, and then you as a writer start gravitating towards things that you didn't intend yourself to gravitate towards. How do you approach that? Do you feel like there's an appeasement that needs to be made for both you as the writer and the readers that are finding these things, or do you feel like, okay, I'm just going to stick to my plan and keep that going, and then maybe if there's a lot of people saying they like this particular character off to the side, maybe I'll split that off and go a different direction. I know, Julia, you kind of did that on your own with a character that was kind of loosely based into your series. So was that your thought process? Did that happen organically, or was it something you always had thought of doing?
Yeah, I didn't initially plan on writing another series in the same world, but I just love the concept of the world so much, and I got just a really great idea for a whole nother series. And I was writing book 3 when I kind of got the idea hey, I could continue in this world because this antagonist is going to be really great in the end. So introducing them as kind of the next bad guy was kind of intentional, but just in the fact that I knew that I was going to write another series and they were going to be the big baddie in the end. And I was like, whoa, well, I got swept away with one character in particular, Tali. And I was just like, I've got to keep going with this world. And every book I write, though, Tali just keeps showing up, doing more stuff in the background. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're throwing off all my plans, because she just wants to be more and more in the book. Each time I write a book, there's more Tali.
Katie, you did this, kind of had a similar experience, the Little Werewolf and the whole Pack series. Was that something that came organically, or was that kind of something you had planned?
Yeah, the Old Town Pack for sure, because I had seeded in book 3 the secondary character who I really wanted to focus on. They ran into the Old Town Pack, and I wanted to explore what happened with her as she met the brothers and got to know a little bit more about the pack. And from there, that spun off the Little Werewolf series, which, like I said, is kind of like the cousins of the Old Town pack. So it was a fun exploration of characters, and I wanted to really get a chance to take a break off the main character of my original series and give some secondary characters a chance to have a spotlight.
I mean, Madeleine, you talked about the prequel and then the devastating shock at the very first part of your 6-book series. Did one kind of wash the hand of the other? Did you feel like that you needed that prequel to kind of help people deal with the first, or vice versa?
Well, the death of the character in the graphic novel actually doesn't have anything to do with the prequel novel. It has to do with Samuel Hunter, one of our main characters, the ex-Pinkerton detective, his motivation to find this entity that killed his wife. And I wanted to write a story about her and from her point of view. And so, yeah, I wanted to tell Elizabeth Hunter's story. You know, there was so little known about Elizabeth, and you know, you don't hear much about her other than she was a medium, like Caitlin, and that Samuel obviously clearly loved her, and she died tragically, but you didn't, without giving it away, I don't want to give away spoilers, but there's actually a thematic point to all of it, and yeah, for those who haven't read the graphic novel and just read the prequel, it's kind of shocking because you grow to love Elizabeth, you know, as much as Samuel did. She kind of saves the world.
Nice. How about for you, Anita? Did anything? I mean, have you spun anything off, or felt like you needed to spin anything off, or you feeling?
Well, yeah, that's kind of how book 5 is going to go with. It's like I had originally planned to end it in book 4 because the arc finishes up. Nimwe's arc finishes up in book 4, but I wanted to explore Martin's side of things. He's the only original character. All the rest of them are Arthurian legend characters, because poor Martin gets really kind of the bad end of everything. He's the new wizard. He's inexperienced. He doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's sort of thrown into the deep end, right?
Right.
I kind of think of him like the Doctor Who companion. Like he's the one that, you know, thrown into the crap all the time. So I wanted to explore his character, developing him into a hero, somewhat a bumbling hero, but still. It's also with my Saga of the Outer Islands series. I'm also developing a prequel because I wanted to tell Death's love story. I really, it's such a weird story between her and the Nightmare Crow. So I wanted to tell that story in a book. So I'm working on a novella as a prequel to Saga of the Outer Islands.
Is that kind of the way to cleanse your own palate? Is the novella, the spin off, the side?
It's a palate cleanser, and sometimes it leads to its own book series.
Yeah, I kind of like to do prequels as like freebies because like I'll either use it as I wanted to explore the backstory of this character, or in this new series I actually wrote the prequel first because I wanted to get to know my characters.
My palate cleanser is actually not working on Boston metaphysical stuff at all. I'm fortunate in that I've been asked to contribute short comic stories for other people's anthologies. So it's always a lot of fun to go play in someone else's sandbox.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get to play in their IP, and it's just like, oh, okay, let's go have fun. Let's go, you know, do these totally different other characters and totally outside of steampunk. And you know, have a lot of fun with it, and then you can hand over the script, and then they got to go deal with the artists and the production, and you don't have to have anything to do with it. It's like, here, it's yours. Have fun. Bye.
Yeah, when I want a real big palate cleanser and change, I'll write like a horror story, which is like the polar opposite of like what I normally write.
I'm wondering for Anita, does that mean you write a romance story if you have a palate cleansing?
No.
Did you figure out the pattern yet? I know 3-act structure can be tough sometimes. but maybe you will in season 2.